Reference angles with degrees. First of all, what is it? Know that a reference angle is always going to be positive. It's always going to be an acute angle, and it's going to help us later on when it comes to sine, cosine, tangent, and the reciprocal ratios. Now, the first step of something later, we're going to use this when it's coming up soon. So as soon as we know reference angle, we're going to progress and kind of put everything together with triangles and kind of figure that out. When it comes to degrees, I want to make sure it's between 0 and 360. I want to figure out what quadrant it's going to be in, and I'm going to subtract that angle from the closest x-axis. Always the x-axis, and it's always going to be positive. So it's always going to be acute. It's always going to be between 0 and 360. It's always going to be acute, and it's always going to be subtracted from the x-axis. So I'm going to ask myself later on, is it in quadrant 1? Is it in quadrant 2? Is it in quadrant 3? And is it in quadrant 4? So I'm going to use 90 and 270 only to determine what quadrant it's in. Is it between 0 and 90? Then it's in first. If it's between 90 and 180, it's in 2. 180 and 270, 3. And 270 and 360, 4. So later on, I'm only going to care about the x-axis. The 90 degrees is only going to determine which quadrant it's in. As soon as I know what quadrant it's in, I'm not going to worry about 90 and 270 anymore. And those can be gone. So let's give it a try. 570. I want to find the reference angle of 570 degrees. So the first thing I ask myself, is it between 0 and 360 degrees? It's not, so I'm going to subtract 360. And now I know it's 210. I know it's between 0 and 360, and my next question is to figure out what quadrant it's in now. So I know 210 is greater than 180, and it's less than 270, so I know it's going to be in this quadrant right here. So as soon as I know it's in that quadrant, it doesn't matter where I draw it. I mean, I can try to draw it the best I can, but in the long run, it's not going to matter. Now I'm going to always ask what x-axis it's closest to. So remember, this angle right here is 210. It's also 570, right? So it's 270 and 510. So either way, I'm going to get the answer I'm looking for. So I'm going to focus on the 210 part of it. Remember, now that I know it's quadrant, I don't care about 90 and 270 anymore. It's always 0, 360, and 180. I'm going to ask myself, what is 210 the closest to? 0, 180, or 360? It's closest to 180, so I'm going to subtract it from 210. So 210 minus 180 is 30. You may ask yourself later, Mr. Hyde, is it 210 minus 180, or is it 180 minus 210? Remember, it's always positive. So regardless of how I subtract it, it's an absolute value thing. So it's always going to be positive. And that's going to be my reference angle. So 30 degrees is going to be my reference angle. So my suggestion would be pause for a second. See if you can do 1035. See what you get. See if you can try that. And then come back and see if you're right. So remember, 1035 is my question. Is it between 0 and 360? It's not, so I'm going to keep subtracting until it is. And now I know that 315 is between 0 and 360. So keep in mind, remember yourselves, 315 and 1035 are coterminal. So they're at the exact same place. So I'm going to ask myself, where is that at? It's greater than 0, it's greater than 90, it's greater than 180, it's greater than 270. So now I know it's going to be in the fourth quadrant. So I know it's going to be there. So when I'm in the fourth quadrant, what I want to do is I'm going to find the nearest x-axis. Now that I have a quadrant, I don't care about 290 and 270 anymore. So here's 315, and 315 is closer to 360. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to subtract 360 from 315, and I'm going to get 45 degrees. Now, just so you get an idea of where we're going with this, I'm going to eventually turn this into a triangle. And this little angle right here next to my x-axis is my reference angle. And that's going to be 45 degrees. And that's what I'm using. I'm going to use that as a reference in order to find the sine, cosine, tangent of 1035. So, once again, the only way I can make this difficult is negatives. We'll talk about radians next week. But now the only way I can make this difficult is negatives. So I would say, again, pause it for a second, see if you can try it. So my first question is it between 0 and 360? It's not, so I'm going to add 360. And I'm going to just keep adding 360, and now I'm going to get 120. Now 120, is it between 0 and 360? Yes. My next question is what quadrant? It's less than 180, so now I know it's going to be in quadrant 2. And when I'm in quadrant 2, I don't care about 90 and 270 anymore. I'm only going to ask about the x-axis. So I'm going to take 180 and this idea of 120. Remember, 120 is here. I'm going to subtract them, and I'm going to get 60 degrees as my reference angle. So the goal is eventually that this angle right here is the reference angle I'm going to use to find the sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent of negative 240 degrees. But for now, that's my reference angle, which is 60 degrees. And that is reference angle with degrees.